I never thought my first pregnancy would come with a side of psychological warfare. Nick and I had been trying for years. Tracking ovulation, doctor's appointments, vitamins, tests. Each month was a cycle of hope and heartbreak. When I finally saw those two pink lines, I burst into tears so hard I could barely breathe. Nick found me sitting on the bathroom floor, holding the test with both hands like it might disappear if I let go. "We did it," he whispered, like he was scared to say it too loud. I nodded. He sank down next to me, pulling me into his arms. "We did it." That night, we told our families. My parents cried. Nick's parents were overjoyed. And Vanessa, Nick's older sister, reacted with an enthusiasm that felt just a little too much. At first, I chalked it up to excitement. She bombarded me with texts asking about nursery colors, birth plans, and, most of all, baby names. She started sending me lists. At first, they seemed random. Then I noticed a pattern. Every name was a variation of Josh. Joshua, Josiah, Jace, Joseph. I felt a strange knot tighten in my stomach. Josh was her ex-husband, the man she cheated on with his brother. Nick and I had already agreed. We weren't naming our baby after anyone in the family. We wanted something fresh, something that was ours. I tried to shut it down gently. "We really appreciate the suggestions," I texted her one night. "But we already have some names in mind." She left me on read. The next day, she texted Nick instead. "Vanessa, you know, it would mean so much to the family if you honored your history." Nick groaned, tossing his phone onto the couch. "Jesus Christ, does she think I have amnesia? Josh isn't dead. He just never wants to see her again." I let out a nervous laugh. Maybe she thinks giving a baby his name will bring him back. Nick rolled his eyes. "Not happening." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Vanessa kept pushing. At family gatherings, she'd casually bring it up. "I just think tradition is so important," she'd say, giving me a pointed look. "Names connect us to our past, you know?" Or she'd sigh dramatically, staring at my stomach like she was mourning something. At one point, she actually turned to Nick's mom and said, "Mom, don't you think it would be so meaningful to keep a family name?" His mom, thankfully, wasn't as pushy. "I think it's their decision," she said carefully. "Babies should have names their parents love." Vanessa pursed her lips, like she wanted to argue but knew better. It was exhausting, but I figured if we just ignored her, she'd eventually get over it. I was wrong. One afternoon, around 4 months into my pregnancy, I casually mentioned that I needed to pick up a prescription. It was something my doctor had prescribed for mild pregnancy complications. Nothing serious, just something to make sure everything stayed on track. Vanessa, who happened to be at Nick's parents' house when I mentioned it, perked up immediately. "Oh, I'm running errands later. I can grab it for you." I hesitated. Something about the way she offered felt off. But I was tired, and the thought of skipping a trip to the pharmacy sounded amazing. So I said yes. That night, I took my usual dose before bed. An hour later, I knew something was wrong. My heart was racing. My vision blurred when I tried to stand. Nausea hit me so hard I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. Nick found me there, gripping the counter, gasping for breath. "What's wrong?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. I don't know." I choked out. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, wrapped an arm around me, and got me into the car. By the time we reached the ER, I could barely keep my eyes open. The doctors ran tests. When they came back, their expressions were serious. "The medication in your system, it's a much higher dose than what was prescribed." Confusion crashed over me. "What? That's not possible." "It was my prescription." The doctor frowned. No pharmacy would have made this mistake. This was intentional. A cold chill ran down my spine. Vanessa, she was the one who picked up my prescription. Nick and I exchanged a look. Neither of us spoke, but we didn't need to. The second we got home, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey, how are you feeling?" My hands were shaking. "What did you do to my medication?" There was a pause. Then she laughed. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic." My stomach dropped. "I ended up in the ER, Vanessa." She sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. I was helping. My grip tightened on the phone. "Helping? Well," she said casually, "I thought maybe you needed a little push. To see what really matters. To reconsider what's best for the family." Nick, who had been listening, snatched the phone from my hand. "You could have killed her," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "It's not like I poisoned her." Nick hung up. We stood in silence, the weight of what just happened settling between us. Nick's fists clenched at his sides. We're going to the police. And just like that, everything changed. The drive to the police station was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that sits heavy in the air, pressing down on your chest. I kept staring out the window, watching the street lights blur past, my fingers twisted together in my lap. My body still felt off. Not as bad as before, but enough that my skin felt too tight, my head too light. Nick's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. I could feel the anger rolling off him in waves. Not the kind that burned hot and fast. The kind that settled deep in his bones. She doesn't get to walk away from this, he muttered. I nodded, even though he wasn't looking at me. I know. And I did. But there was still this tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head. What if they didn't take us seriously? What if they dismissed it as some kind of family dispute? The officer who took our statement was polite but unreadable. He listened carefully, asked for details, took notes. Nick showed him the text messages, the hospital records, the prescription bottle. When he saw Vanessa's message, maybe this will make you reconsider what's best for the family, his eyebrows lifted slightly. That doesn't look good for her, he admitted. No shit, Nick muttered. The officer ignored that. We'll look into it. In the meantime, if she contacts you again, document everything. And if she shows up at your house, call us immediately. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's smirking face, heard her voice laughing through the phone. By morning, the shock had worn off, leaving behind something sharper. Rage. Vanessa had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had deliberately put me and my baby in danger. And she didn't even care. Nick was already on the phone when I walked into the kitchen, pacing angrily by the window. I don't care what she told you, Mom, he snapped. She's not the victim here. I sighed, sinking into a chair. Of course. She had gotten to his mother first. Nick's face darkened. No, we are not overreacting. Jesus, she could have killed my wife. I could hear his mother's voice through the speaker, but I couldn't make out the words. Just the tone. That familiar mix of can't you just let this go? And family is family. Nick let out a humorless laugh. Yeah? Well, maybe she should have thought of that before she decided to play doctor with someone else's prescription. I dropped my head into my hands. Of course his mom wanted to sweep it under the rug. That was just how their family worked. Issues got smoothed over. Drama got ignored. Everyone just pretended things were fine, no matter how bad they got. Not this time. Nick finally hung up, exhaling sharply. She thinks we should talk it out with Vanessa. I let out a bitter laugh. Right. Let me just invite her over for tea. Maybe she can drug me again. Nick sat down across from me, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. I think we need to cut her off completely. I looked at him. You mean? No contact, he said firmly. No more family events. No more chances. He swallowed hard, his eyes dark. She could have killed you, babe. That's not something I can just move on from. I reached for his hand. He squeezed mine tightly. That should have been the end of it. But Vanessa wasn't done. A few days later, Nick's cousin Rachel called. Hey, she said hesitantly. I thought you guys should know. Vanessa's been talking to people. Saying some weird stuff. I braced myself. What kind of weird stuff? Rachel hesitated. She's been telling people that the baby might not be Nick's. My stomach dropped. What? She's acting like you have something to hide, Rachel continued. Like you're turning everyone against her because of it. I gripped the phone tighter. My skin felt hot, my heart pounding in my ears. She knows that's not true, I said, my voice shaking with fury. Rachel sighed. Yeah, but you know how she is. If she can't control the situation, she'll control the narrative. Nick must have seen my face, because his expression immediately hardened. What's wrong? I switched the call to speaker. Rachel hesitated. I didn't want to stress you guys out, but I figured you'd rather hear it from me than from some random relative at the next family gathering. Nick clenched his jaw. There won't be a next family gathering. I could practically hear Rachel nodding. Honestly, probably for the best. After I hung up, I felt sick. It wasn't enough that Vanessa had tried to hurt me. Now she was trying to ruin my marriage, too. Nick rubbed slow circles on my back. She's desperate. I swallowed hard. She's dangerous. Nick pulled out his phone. Let's make sure she never gets another chance to hurt you again. And with that, he called a lawyer. Vanessa wanted to play games? Fine. She was about to lose. A week passed, and the storm only got worse. Vanessa had gone into full damage control mode, spinning her own version of the story. She painted herself as the wronged sister, the misunderstood victim. Nick's mom was already halfway convinced. She just wants to talk, she had said over the phone, her voice tight with exhaustion. If you two could just... No. Nick cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mom, she drugged my pregnant wife. His mother sighed, as if that was some minor inconvenience. She said she didn't mean to. Nick let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh well, that makes it okay. I could hear the frustration in her voice. Nick, she's your sister. And Oliver is my son, he snapped. My wife almost ended up in the hospital because of her. How do you not get that? Silence. Then, quietly, she's still family. Nick looked ready to throw his phone across the room. Instead, he ended the call and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, exhaling slowly. I swear to God, he muttered. If one more person tells me to forgive and forget, I'm gonna lose my mind. I rubbed slow circles on his back. I don't care what they say. We're doing the right thing. He nodded, but his jaw was still tight. And then, just when I thought Vanessa couldn't sink any lower, she did. It was around noon when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello. A woman's voice, clipped and professional. Is this my name? Yes. This is Sarah with Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report concerning your newborn. I froze. What? I can't disclose the source, she said. But the report raised concerns about the baby's well-being. We'd like to schedule a visit too. No. I interrupted, my pulse pounding in my ears. This is a mistake. My son is fine. She sighed, like she had heard this before. I understand that this can be upsetting, but we do have to follow up on every report. Nick must have seen the look on my face because he was immediately in front of me. What's wrong? I put the call on speaker. Someone called CPS on us. His entire body stiffened. You have got to be kidding me. Sarah continued, unfazed. A caseworker will need to come by for a wellness check. We'll just be making sure that Oliver is in a safe environment. I could barely breathe. When? Tomorrow afternoon. Nick's hands clenched into fists. And if we refuse? Her tone didn't change. Then we would have to escalate the case. I felt sick. We scheduled the visit. What else could we do? The moment I hung up, Nick exploded. She's trying to get Oliver taken away, he said, pacing the living room like a caged animal. She actually, Jesus Christ, she's out of her mind. I sat down, feeling like my legs might give out. What if they believe her? Nick knelt in front of me, gripping my hands. They won't. There's nothing wrong, babe. Oliver is perfect. They'll see that. I nodded, but panic still clawed at my chest. The next 24 hours were a blur. We cleaned the house, even though it was already spotless. We went over every single detail, making sure everything looked perfect. I barely slept. And then, the next day, a woman with a clipboard knocked on our door. She was polite. Kind, even. She asked to see Oliver, and I held him close as she looked him over, checking his weight, his skin, his alertness. He's beautiful, she said with a small smile. I barely managed a nod. She asked a few questions. Did we have a pediatrician? Yes. Did we have a support system? Yes. Had either of us ever been arrested? No. Finally, she stood. I don't see any cause for concern. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly cried. However, she continued, flipping through her notes, I do need to inform you that the person who made the report has also been making similar calls about other family members in the past. I blinked. Wait, what? She sighed. This isn't the first time we've received a questionable report linked to your sister-in-law. Nick let out a breath. So you know she's full of shit. She gave a tight smile. We have our suspicions. When she left, Nick turned to me. This has to stop. I swallowed hard. What do we do? His expression was pure steel. We ended. 2 days after the CPS visit, we filed for a restraining order. We didn't just have the police report from the medication incident. We now had proof that Vanessa had made a false CPS report, something that could have actually gotten our son taken from us if the caseworker hadn't seen through her bullshit. Nick didn't hesitate. The second that woman left our house, he was already dialing our lawyer. She's escalating, he told him. We need to cut her off legally before she does something even worse. The lawyer agreed. With everything we had, texts, police records, the CPS report, it wouldn't be hard to get a judge to approve an order keeping Vanessa far away from us. But Vanessa wasn't done yet. The night before our court hearing, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Unknown, you won't get away with this. My heart clenched. A second later, another text. Unknown, you took everything from me. I sat up, my pulse pounding. Nick stirred beside me. What's wrong? I turned my phone toward him. His expression darkened instantly. It's her, I whispered. Nick grabbed the phone, saving the messages before blocking the number. We'll show this in court. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. Vanessa was losing control, and people like her didn't just accept that. The next morning, we arrived at the courthouse. Vanessa was already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, her foot bouncing anxiously. She looked bad. Her hair was greasy, her clothes wrinkled like she hadn't bothered to change them in days. The moment she saw us, her face twisted with anger. Nick didn't even look at her, just took my hand and led me inside. The hearing was quick. The judge reviewed the evidence, the police report, the CPS visit, the threatening texts. Vanessa tried to argue, tried to cry. I was just worried about my nephew, she said, her voice breaking. Is that a crime? Nick's lawyer didn't even blink. Calling Child Protective Services under false pretenses is, actually. The judge granted the restraining order. Vanessa wasn't allowed to contact us. Come near us. Speak to us. The moment the decision was made, Vanessa let out a sharp, bitter laugh. This is what you wanted, isn't it? She spat, her eyes locked on me. To turn him against me? Nick stood, adjusting his suit. You did that all by yourself, Vanessa. She glared at me like I was the real problem. Like I was the reason her life was falling apart, not her own actions. I held her gaze. Stay away from my family. She didn't say another word. We walked out of that courtroom knowing we were finally free. But the thing about people like Vanessa, they never go down without one last, desperate move. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The restraining order meant no more texts. No more unexpected visits. No more Vanessa. Or at least, that's what I thought. A week after the court hearing, Nick and I finally let our guard down, just a little. We focused on Oliver, soaking in every little moment. The way his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, how his face scrunched up before he let out a sleepy sigh. I had missed this. The joy of being a mother without fear lurking in the back of my mind. Then, late one night, there was a knock at the door. A deep, solid bang bang bang. Nick tensed immediately, setting down his glass of water. Who the hell? I grabbed his arm. Don't open it. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Nick moved toward the peephole, his shoulders rigid. You've got to be fucking kidding me. My heart pounded. Is it? Yeah. I took a shaky breath. Call the cops. He was already dialing. I backed away, pressing a hand to my chest to steady my breathing. Oliver was asleep in the nursery. He was safe. That was all that mattered. Vanessa's voice cut through the door. Nick, she banged again. Come on. Just talk to me. Nick didn't say a word. Just waited for dispatch to pick up. Please, Vanessa whined. I just want to see my nephew. My stomach turned. She didn't have a nephew. Not anymore. Dispatch finally answered, and Nick spoke in a low, controlled voice. I have a restraining order against my sister. She's at my house, refusing to leave. Vanessa kept ranting, her voice getting more and more erratic. This isn't fair. You let her turn you against me. Nick's expression didn't change. Yeah, we need officers here now. Then, something slammed into the door so hard the whole frame shook. I flinched. Nick's grip tightened around the phone. She's trying to get in. The operator must have said something reassuring, but my ears were ringing too loud to hear it. Then, sirens. Vanessa let out a panicked noise, her shadow shifting outside the peephole. She ran. By the time the police arrived, she was already gone. But it didn't matter. Because we had security cameras. The footage showed everything. Her face. Her attempts to break in. It was enough. 2 days later, Vanessa was arrested for violating the restraining order. This time, there was no getting out of it. Nick and I didn't celebrate. We didn't even talk about it much. We just held Oliver a little tighter that night, knowing that, for real this time, she was gone. In the weeks that followed, we cut ties with anyone who tried to defend her. Nick's mother still made excuses, but we didn't listen. Some wounds don't heal. And some people don't deserve second chances. Vanessa had spent months trying to control our lives, trying to take everything from us. In the end, she lost everything instead. And we got to move forward. Without her.